This is episode number 190. Today, we're featuring the legendary painter, Carolyn Anderson.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to everybody to the PleinAir Podcast. I am so excited because I love painting fall color. I don't live where there's a lot of fall color. I live in Austin, Texas, but we have been spending the summer and the fall in the Adirondacks this year. First time in 18 years I've seen the color up here because the kids graduated high school and they're in college. Yay! Anyway, I've been tuning up on my fall color painting, and the color has been spectacular. I mean, the hills, the mountains are glowing red. It's incredible. And I thought I was going to have to mute it back, but man, it really works. It's really fun. Anyway, I'm kind of tuning up for Fall Color Week, and that's my retreat. I do an annual retreat every fall. This year it's in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. It starts on the 12th, goes through the 20th or 19th or something. Anyway, we basically just get together and we paint. And we haven't been able to do any in-person events. Live events we've done, but live online, but not in person this year, so this is the first and only time. And so if you've been quarantined and you want to get in the car and drive up to New Hampshire and join us for this event, it's all inclusive, right? Your hotel room, your meals, everything is inclusive in the event. And of course, you got to come. It's just incredible. And we have seats for the first time ever because of COVID, right? We had some seats drop out. Anyway, if you're game, just be bold, have fun with it. Come to Fall Color Week. Just go to fallcolorweek.com. I guess it's not that easy for me to say, is it? If you happen to see the PleinAir Salon Awards last Friday night, the grand prize winner, $15,000 in the cover of the magazine, went to Dave Santianis. We did it online because we couldn't do it in person, and Dave cried. It was pretty cool. Anyway, beautiful paintings and all the finalists. I mean, just absolutely really, really tough calls. So many good ones. So congratulations to all the people who were finalists. Congratulations to all the winners. You can learn more about it at pleinairsalon.com. By the way, while you're there, enter because the monthly deadline for this month, September, is the 30th. And so just go to pleinairsalon.com. And speaking of deadlines, our big virtual conference, Realism Live, has a price increase on September 30th. Now, we had PleinAir Live, and that's all about plein air painting. But we realized when we were having that event that a lot of people are doing a lot of different things. They're doing, still life and portraits and figures and flowers and architecture and all this other stuff. So we decided to put together a conference, and we have absolutely incredible lineup. And the big enchilada, really huge, is we got the great Odd Nerdrum from Norway. This is unheard of. I mean, this doesn't happen. And so that's a big feather in our cap, so to speak. And of course, we've got some incredible landscape artists. Mark D'Alessio is joining us. He's going to be doing plein air. Kathy Odom is doing plein air. Eric Koppel, I guess. I always get his name wrong. He's going to shoot me. Anyway, and dozens of others, the great Daniel Graves from Florence Academy, many. Just look at the website, go to Realism Live, but just know that you can save $200. It's still reasonably priced, even if you don't want to save the money, but why not save it? Then you can use it for art supplies anyway. Right. So go to realismlive.com before the 30th as it's taking place in October. We also have a new event coming up in January. It's called Watercolor Live, and we've got the great Joe Zabukvich and many other great artists, and you can find that at Watercolor Live. Also, the deadline for our artist and selfie competition, which is self-portraits, portraits of other artists, or paintings of other artists, paintings of artists in plein air, paintings of art studios, We're going to be giving those away during Realism Live, and as a result, you want to get your entry in if you were doing self-portraits or have done them or these other types of things. You can learn more about it at artistandselfie.com. All right, in this week's Plein Air Today newsletter, we have an incredible roundup of cloud and sky paintings from our readers. Remember to tag us on Instagram at PleinAir Magazine so we can see your work and maybe use it in our newsletter. So check out Plein Air Today. It's a newsletter. You can find it at outdoorpainter.com to sign up. Now, also in this coming issue of Plein Air Magazine, there's a feature, Why Pastel is Perfect for Plein Air. 5 top artists reveal how to make the most of the medium outdoors and why you should consider adding pastel to your collection. All right. Anyway, coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, we want to get right to our interview with the great, and I mean the great, Carolyn Anderson. Carolyn Anderson, welcome to the Plein Air Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
It's rare that I get a legend on the podcast, so this is pretty cool.
Right.
How's it feel to be a legend?
I didn't really know I was one, but thank you.
Well, you certainly have developed a fabulous reputation. Your painting is second to none. It's just absolutely fabulous. And so I really thought it'd be kind of fun just to talk about painting and not necessarily about plein air painting, and just painting. And you and I have had some interesting experiences together. I remember one of the first times I met you. We were in Vermont. Do you remember that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. At Peter Miller's place with CW Monday.
That's right. And I don't know how I got invited to hang out with you guys, but we had a rain day. And so we all hung out in Peter's studio, and I had done this horrible painting. And so I have you guys all worked on it because we had nothing else to do. So you worked on it for a while, and CW worked on it for a while, and I think Peter Miller worked on it, and Todd Reifers worked on it. And then I made you all sign it. I still have it.
Did we really all sign that?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Yeah. You signed the back.
Oh, well, I don't even remember what it looked like. That's, having multiple people paint on something they aren't even viewing is a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, it certainly was fun for me. And my level of experience at the time was pretty low. And so it was kind of fun. Anyway.
Yeah, that was just a great time hanging out with those people. So.
Well, that's the best part about, all of this is that you're living your life as a creative being and you're meeting and hanging out with other wonderful people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how did this journey begin for you?
Well, I don't know. I'm just one of those people who was always interested in art. I was, I always drew. I grew up by Chicago, so we used to go to the Art Institute a lot. And I think those early experiences at the Art Institute, some of the work probably had a pretty big influence on me. Eventually, I don't know, I just decided I want to be an artist. My parents said, no, you can't do that. You have to go to school and, actually be something. So I went to college for a while for teaching, decided that isn't what I wanted to do, and then just went out on my own. Eventually moved out west and worked part-time, raised a son on my own, and built an art career all at the same time.
Really? What was that like?
Yeah. Poverty-stricken.
Yeah.
That would probably be about it. I came out west originally as a VISTA volunteer and worked on an Indian reservation. And so when I decided I wanted to leave Illinois, I just came back to Montana where I'd already been. And so, yeah, I worked for years and did art on the side, and then went part-time and did art on the side. And the year that my son turned 18 and graduated from high school, I quit my job. And then I was just on my own, just doing art.
That was pretty gutsy.
And it was scary.
Yeah, well, it is scary.
Yeah. There's just times you can go for a long time and not make any money. But things always just kind of seem to work out just when, you're wondering where the next money's coming from and how you're going to pay a bill. Then all of a sudden, it's a miracle. A check shows up in the mailbox or something, And then, I started teaching workshops out in Seattle. I think that was probably in the 80s. And so that was good. And then I taught workshops for a while for Disney Imagineering in California. And that was a big learning experience. And so I've probably been teaching workshops and traveling around for art for well over 30 years.
Well, I've come up with a whole bunch of questions from the last couple of statements, and so I'm not sure where to go with it. But the first one that comes to mind is, what was it like living and working on an Indian reservation? Are we even allowed to use the word Indian anymore?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Native Americans.
Right.
Yeah. It was interesting. I mean, coming out of Chicago, it was a real eye-opener. So, when your only experience with Native Americans has been from TV shows like The Lone Ranger or something like that,
right,
to actually, live and work with the people on the reservation was a real eye-opener, a real educational experience, and just gives you a lot of respect for different cultures. Absolutely,
I would think so. Mm-hmm. Well, that was fascinating. Now, the other one was about Imagineering. So I'm assuming that they probably came to you because you're so good at the whole idea of creativity, the idea of not falling into a routine when you're painting.
Probably. A friend of mine was a Disney Imagineering artist, Tom Gillian. I don't know if you're familiar with Tom's work, but Tom he lives here in Montana, but he was a full-time Disney artist, and he was the one that got several of us involved in working with Disney. So Tom started it, and at the time, Disney was doing a lot of just benefits for their artists to, open up their horizon, so to speak. And so they'd bring in different kinds of painters to teach different workshops. And then in turn, we also had workshops here in Montana for a lot of the Disney artists. And so that was a great experience. It was one thing that just always impressed me was when we'd go there to work, and we'd go across the road to their separate art studio, which was just for regular painting stuff, not the workspace. The setup, of course, was just primo. Of course, you'd get these models in there just dressed to the nines, and
they had access to a lot of costumes.
Well, yes, and then of course, just the lighting. And the model stand was this big, huge model stand in the round. It was just, everything was just really kind of exciting, especially coming from Montana. So, but the biggest thing, probably the most impactful thing that happened there was I got to use the Disney Imagineering library, which was basically like a small town library, except it was just all filled with art-related books, the whole library. Wow. It was phenomenal. And, of course, that was before the Internet. So, if I wanted art books, I'd go to Library Loan, and I'd get books through the library. But you had to, number one, know what you were looking for, be able to give the title. Well, in that library, it was just all art books, and I could just wander around forever. And then I got asked to do a paper on visual language, and so then that kind of all keyed into flying back and forth to Glendale, California, just to go to the library and hang out for days on end to do my work. That was the big start to what I incorporated into a lot of my workshops later on about teaching visual language.
So you probably have a fairly substantial library of your own now, yes?
Pretty decent, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty decent. Yeah, I try not to add any more. My bookshelves are full.
Oh, I know it's an addiction. I went over to Russia in March, and
you bought books.
Well, the first time I went to Russia, I brought a suitcase full of books home, a suitcase, and that suitcase weighed double probably probably weighed 150 pounds, and I had to buy another suitcase and divide it into that suitcase. And then I had to pay the weight overage, and I had to pay the extra bags, and then I had to pay it from Russia to Sweden, and then from Sweden home. And I think I ended up spending $1,000 for probably $200 worth of books. But they're books I couldn't find anywhere else. And so when I was back over there, I swore I wouldn't do it. But of course I did, and I bought another suitcase full of books.
Yeah.
But, there's
pretty
such...
good at being selective anymore.
Yeah. Well, there's such a wonderful tool. I mean, how do you use them? Do you, when you're like struggling with a particular thing, do you like flip through the books and try to figure out how somebody handled it?
Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I'll just be flipping through, I find something that I like, and sometimes I'll lay books out on the floor, and it's not particularly because of subject or anything. There might just be something in that painting that grabs me. It could be color tone or maybe a value pattern. And it's not that I'm going to, try and impose that on the painting I'm working on, but it's there for inspiration, just a little. I say if you're gonna study art, you want to study some of this stuff that has stood the test of time,
Absolutely. So would you let us in on some of the concepts that you might have taught at an Imagineering workshop? What are you trying to get these people to think about or do when you do a workshop with them?
Well, the Imagineering, that was the start of it, because at that point I realized that while some other painters were interested in my looser approach, let's say, to painting, that I really didn't have a good way of explaining everything. And so using that Disney library was kind of the start of my whole interest in trying to figure out not just why certain things are important or how this works and that doesn't work, but then also how to explain it. So it just kind of formed the whole basis of what I went on to teach after that point. So, for example, the use of edges and color and line shape, any of that information. So I keyed it back into visual language and how we see, because how we see is a big part of what we're seeing when we paint. So I know that kind of sounds a little off in woo-woo land, but it's not. So, for example, I'll just give you a quick example, because edges are one area that a lot of artists have a hard time with. And the reason why we have a hard time with edges is because we're wired to basically see things as edges. We're wired to notice the dimension of something and where something is and what it is. And so we tend to think that we see edges where we aren't really seeing them. So it's more of a seeing problem than a painting problem.
Interesting. So, that raises a question. There's kind of a debate between some painters, and I don't suppose there's a right or wrong, but, you talk to somebody like C.W. Mundy, who would say, his line is there's a star and there's supporting actors. And so, in other words, your focal point, that's getting your lightest light, your darkest dark, your sharpest edge, your highest chroma. And then everything kind of gets softer and blurrier and grayer and so on out from that point. That's one philosophy. Another philosophy would be Joseph McGurl, who he would say, I put everything in focus. Now, he still does edge work, but he's like the way we work, and as humans, we look at one area and that's in focus, and then we move our eyes and we look at that area and that's in focus.
That's in focus, exactly.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on that?
But there's no right or wrong here.
No, but
it's a range of perception.
What do you do?
I don't put much of anything in focus. But then if I need to punch something up, I'll go for the tried and true, which is your lightest light and darkest dark. But I usually work my edges all the time in all ways. So I don't go in and paint and then go back and modify edges necessarily. I'll be doing the same thing from beginning to end.
And you're painting everything kind of very softly.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a correct way to describe it? Because
yeah, I suppose it's a word problem, I guess. When you'd say, well, if you just think that paintings can lie on a scale, just like you described with two other painters, from fuzzy, let's say, to detailed, we've got a sliding scale in there. So ultra detailed to no detail at all. And so you can kind of move that little slider back and forth. And I suppose if you picked a middle, I would be from the middle towards the fuzzy side.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty good. I seem to recall that you and I had a very deep conversation one night. I don't remember where or when, but it may have been at the FACE conference. And you were telling me about some author, some book that you had read that changed how you think about painting or changed how you think about edges and so on. Do you recall what that was? It was something about how
was
we...
it Vision?
I'm sorry?
Vision and Art, the Biology of Seeing?
Yes.
Does that sound right?
That's it.
By Margaret Livingston. Yeah.
So what's
Vision and Art, the Biology of Seeing. Excellent book. Everybody should buy it. Here's the deal on the book, though, because I get some students that will say, oh, there's too much science in it. Well, to this day, I've read parts of that book I don't know how many times, and I still can't grasp the exact science that she's talking about. She's a neuroscientist. I mean, I'm sorry, her learning scale and mine are two different things here. However, this is why the book is important. She connects it actually to art. She does it deliberately. She uses lots of illustrations, so it's a large book with lots of pictures, and so every artist should love it.
And was there any particular primary point that you pulled out of it that you could share?
Oh, not just one thing, really seriously. It's but there's that part about edge detection. You can find it in other books. So edge detection is a big thing. Peripheral vision is a really fascinating concept, and I think she explains it pretty well. And peripheral vision explains a lot of the Impressionist paintings. So when we talk about detail, and as you said, McGurl said, well, we move our eyes from, one place to the other. So our central vision, or our foveal vision, that the little area where we actually see detail, is really tiny. So if you held your arm out and stuck your thumb up, it would be about the area of your thumbnail. That's how small our detail vision is.
Really?
And everything else around that space is peripheral vision. And what happens is we notice the detail vision, and the peripheral vision is what I call the app that's always working in the background. So it does lots of things, but we don't particularly pay attention to it. So that peripheral vision, in a sense, explains some of the Impressionist paintings in the sense that you get maybe a feeling of movement. So that's that impreciseness that you'll see in some of the Impressionist paintings give them a quality of before, now, and after, so to speak, kind of like a time-lapse thing instead of just a fixed image. So that's partly relies on the effect of peripheral vision. But one of the most striking examples that she used in her book was the painting of the Mona Lisa. And so she took the advice of the historian Ernst Gombrich that we shouldn't take paintings like that for granted. We're so used to seeing them, we just don't really look at them anymore. You don't really see them. And he said you should go and look at the painting and pretend like you've never seen it before and figure out what's going on. Well, Margaret Livingston figured out, she'd do just that with her background in how we see. And so she went and she studied the painting, and she realized that Mona Lisa's smile, as we see her smile, and it kind of gives that painting an elusive quality, almost like movement, you could say. Not a fixed smile, but, 1 minute she's smiling and 1 minute she's not. And so she realized that what was going on is we were looking at the painting with a mixture of detail vision or foveal vision and peripheral vision. And so they're different, they're good at different things. Obviously, the detail vision is fairly explanatory. So as you move your eyes around the painting, let's say perhaps you look towards the top of the painting, her mouth then is going to look differently because you're then seeing her mouth area with your peripheral vision. And peripheral vision is better at detecting, in art terms, value, better at detecting light and shadow. And what makes a mouth smile or not smile is the information around the mouth. It's the muscles around the mouth that create just slight hints of shadow.
Yeah.
We're better able to see that with our peripheral vision than we are with our detail vision. And so as your eyes move around the painting, the mouth is in effect changing.
All right. So if it were, was it painted as if peripheral, or is it painted as if sharp or detail?
Well, no, it's a combination.
Yeah.
It's a combination. But when you look somewhere else on the painting, then, like I said, when your eyes focus somewhere else on the painting, not focus on the mouth. She discovered this by just looking at it and then just looking at the mouth.
Yeah.
And she realized that when she stared at the mouth, just at the mouth, Mona Lisa wasn't really smiling.
Huh.
She lost that whole enigmatic quality.
Right,
So,
because we read faces and it's the muscles in the eyes and the squint in the eyes that make the smile. So it's the whole picture.
It's not the detail. It's the elements of shadow.
Yeah.
Slight shadow as the form changes.
Interesting.
So it's not the detail. The peripheral vision is way better at seeing light and shadow.
So if that's the case, then it means color is almost irrelevant.
Exactly. Yeah. Detail vision is really good at color and detail. But peripheral vision is better at seeing those slight shadows. So when you're looking directly at the mouth with your detail vision, you aren't necessarily seeing those slight shadows around the mouth that give her that faint smile. It's only when you move your eyes somewhere else.
Right.
And that's why when viewing the painting, and as your eyes move around the painting, she can kind of look like she's smiling and kind of look like she's not smiling.
So thus she appeals to everybody.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But peripheral vision. So, and that's the other thing that in painting, it's one thing that people can take advantage of. So there's another technique, it's called, this comes to us from horse trainers, called soft eyes. So when you're looking straight ahead, what you want to be able to do is, pull up your focus, like I'm looking right now at a light switch on the wall, but then relax your whole body, so to speak, just relax, and let your eyes, I wish there were a different term, but it says let your eyes go soft. Well, basically, you aren't focusing.
Well, it's kind of looking. It's not a squint. It's kind of you're pulling back a little bit from the focus.
It's not even that really. It's just a total relaxation.
Right. Okay.
Totally relax your eyes.
Yeah.
And then you will notice that you will see more off to the sides.
That's true.
You won't necessarily see that detail in the same way because you aren't focused on the detail, but you will see more to the sides. So you're aware of a larger part of your surroundings. And it's a good technique to use when you're painting also.
So how do you employ that?
Well, it's similar to the idea of it gives you a different perceptual information. So if you squint when you're painting, that's better at seeing values.
Yeah.
Not good for color, right? Because like I just said, detail vision is what sees color. So when you squint, you're minimizing information. You're more easily able to detect patterns. Now, when you use, and then some people, will like take off their glasses when they start a painting.
Yeah.
So they aren't seeing so much detail. They aren't getting caught up in all the detail. I mean, that's a technique. Of course, using a mirror changes up the image. We're kind of all working on the same types of things. But using that technique of relaxing your eyes instead of just concentrating on the detail allows you to see the information in a slightly different way. Not so much the things, but to see the whole pattern.
The more I paint, Carolyn, the more I realize that less is more. And what I mean by that, for instance, is if I put the big shapes in, then that's almost all I need, and I can put a tiny little sense of what's inside that big shape without really putting a lot there, and it reads. And that kind of, to me, it kind of goes to what you were talking about that peripheral vision. I mean, the goal here is to create an illusion, and I assume you do want to draw the eye somewhere, I assume, maybe not, but
you need to hold someone's attention. That's the big thing about a painting. So it can be overt or subliminal almost. It doesn't all have to be overt to hold someone's attention. Here again, sliding scale of perception. So you need to hold the viewer's attention, in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, it's just a once and done kind of thing. Oh yeah, that's nice, and then you need to engage the viewer. But the problem, so the simplicity, that's exactly true, because that plays to that whole idea of peripheral vision, number one, and then the idea that most of our vision and how we respond to a visual world is information we aren't necessarily aware of. Like I said, it's all the stuff playing in the background that's working hard to let you see the world as it is. And so when we just focus on certain things and take them out of context, we miss the big picture. Because we actually, like I tell my students sometimes, just stop and think. If you see someone that you know across the street walking away from you, how do you know it's that person you know? How do you recognize it as, Bob, Sue, or Mary?
Big
shapes.
Shapes.
Look, there's Bob. It's certainly not because of detail, is it? So there's something else going on there. But we pay attention to the detail things because this gets fascinating. It's language-based. And so our language actually directs what we see and how we see. Yeah.
Well, and it's that language that's telling us that a tree should look like a tree.
It should be brown and with green leaves. Brown with green leaves. That's the symbol information. And that, to make like a short story of it, is what I call, the A for apple thing. So just like kids learn those early symbols, A is for apple, B is for banana, we have symbol information for things, for everything we see, which is layered into our whole world. So we can rapidly glance at something and go, oh yeah, that's an apple. Oh yeah, there's my coffee cup, without particularly paying attention to all the qualities that we use when we're painting, which is the quality of the light, where's the shadow, what's the shape, is there an edge, is there not an edge, is some other light bouncing off of that. There's all that other information that gets layered on when you're painting, but when you're just, motivating or moving through the world, you don't pay attention to that stuff. And that's because of that symbol information. So the letter A is just as much a symbol as a child's drawing of an apple. And we carry those throughout our whole life,
And they're hard to abandon.
They're very hard to abandon, because we are language-based.
Right.
That's the dominant part of our brains.
I still fight that battle 25 years later. It's still, I'll lay in a tree trunk automatically as brown, even though I don't see brown. It's a bad habit.
Yeah.
So based on your 300-400 years of painting and your what you started out as and where you have ended up today, how do you teach differently today than you would have, say, 10 or 15 years ago?
I try and make people think more about what it is that we're seeing and maybe how one wants to express it. Because the problem is here's a big problem with teaching art, obviously, is that if you teach someone to paint like you do, for example, or let's say I teach someone to paint like I do, which I don't think I could, to tell the truth. I could give them hints, this is kind of, but there's so many decisions being made all through the process that it's kind of difficult for someone else to step into your shoes. But I could teach some of the basics of how I approach a painting.
Yeah.
But even if they could get a handle on that information, then it's very difficult for them to make it their own. And what you want to be able to do is teach people what they need to know to move forward, but also to find their own vision.
Well, the last thing we want is to create 50 more Carolyn Andersons or David LaFells or whomever.
Exactly.
Right.
There's no point. You can't be that other person.
There is a lot of that. You can see a lot of that. You can see the clear influence of another artist's work
Sure.
in the works of their students. And sometimes those students never get beyond it. They just say, well, I want to paint something as beautiful as that person, and they never get beyond it.
Well, see, that's the problem. And maybe it's just in personality, because some people maybe are looking for answers and some people are looking for process. So if you're looking for a journey, then you should be open to exploring and wandering down a little path that goes off in a different direction. So there's nothing wrong with, we all have influences. We're all influenced by other work, The problem is when we get influenced by only one, let's say one painter. We should have lots of influences.
So I'm going to guess. I don't think we've ever discussed this, but if I had to guess who had a dominant influence on your work, I would say Nikolai Feshin.
Yes.
Is that right or wrong?
Definitely, and it's pretty. The main reason, because he was probably one of the first painters that I came across that combined abstract painting imagery with realism. So that to me was impressive. It's still impressive.
Do you know Monticelli? I think his name is Monticelli. Maybe I have the name wrong. I'll have to think of it. But Italian painter from probably the early 19th century, probably.
Oh, well, you're Antonio Mancini.
Oh, Mancini. That's it, Mancini.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah. Well, obviously, Feshin had to have been influenced by Mancini.
I would think so, because I went over to see Nikolai Blokhin in Russia, who paints very, very much in a Feshin-esque kind of a field, completely different. Mm-hmm. And he had never seen Mancini's work. I took him a book of his work, and he teared up. When he saw that work, he teared up. And Mancini crossed that line between complete abstraction and yet realism. The faces were typically, in focus, but everything else was just brushstrokes.
Yeah, some of his faces, even though they were very realistically drawn, he did some strange things.
Yeah, well, he was in an insane asylum,
Well, Sargent called Mancini the greatest living painter.
I did not know that.
Sargent, because Mancini had definite issues. I'm not sure what, but he and lots of people over the years tried to help him, and Sargent was one of the people, because Sargent just thought he was this wonderful painter, and so he would periodically try and help him. But like all people who were, off the spectrum, just a little bit of normal, he could be hard to deal with. And so he would end up alienating everybody, and I think eventually he alienated, Sargent too, which was a shame.
Well, you wonder, though, I mean, the guy was genius. You think about the landscape painter Blakelock. I don't know if you know his work, but there was a period of time when Blakelock was the highest auction price, highest selling artist. This was at the time of the Hudson River School painters. And his stuff was completely abstract, just totally. He went and lived on reservations with the Indians. Unlike Bierstadt, who went with the military, this guy actually went out on his own. And he went insane. So you wonder today, what is the impact of Prozac on artwork? Because there are these people who are absolutely tortured, manic souls who are brilliant, whose brilliance might get squashed if they're put on these drugs.
Who knows? Who knows? But I don't know that any one of us would have wanted to be Mancini despite his artwork. I mean, he would, when he run out of canvases, he'd be working in an unheated space because half the time he didn't have any money. He'd be wearing like 6 layers of dirty clothes, and when he'd run out of canvases, he'd paint on the walls. Uh-huh. So, I mean, the idea of a tortured soul is definite, but his paintings, oh my word. And are you familiar with his Graticola?
No.
Well, that's a fascinating story. Do you want me to briefly tell you?
Yes.
I think I find this one fascinating. So his early paintings were definitely, I'll just say, a little slicker than his older paintings.
Probably because he was fresh out of school and he had to overcome that training.
I just don't. His later paintings were more tortured, let's say, but they were incredibly powerful. His earlier paintings were smoother, a little more slick finish, extremely beautiful. There's just no, just gorgeous paintings. But his later paintings were something else entirely, but incredibly powerful. Well, in his later years, or at least he didn't use it at the beginning, but his Graticola was this system that he used that was basically horizontal and vertical wires in a frame, big grid. Now, here's where it gets strange. He would put it in front of the model. There's pictures of him doing this. And then he would put another one right up to his canvas.
So this is kind of like a Dürer grid.
Well, here's the catch. This is what people miss about his Graticola. What he did was strings or pieces of wire at angles. It was all about the angles. And you'll see that in Feshen's work, too. You'll see that exact same thing. It's like making connections, let's say, from the top of the model's ear to the elbow or, whatever. It's all those angles that you can make connecting the form. So he would crisscross this Graticola, which was, horizontal and vertical is only going to get you so far. That's good for beginning drawers or maybe scaling up for a mural or something like that, but that's about it, because you lose the dynamics of the image by following a horizontal and vertical grid. But by using the diagonals and all these angles crisscrossing each other, now all of a sudden you start to end up with a really dynamic image. Now, when people question him why he did that, so he would paint through the Graticola that was on his canvas. And a lot of his later paintings, you can actually see the imprint of the wires on the painting. But his paintings also got more frenzied, thicker application of paint. Sometimes he'd even break up pottery pieces and embed them into the painting.
So he's actually putting the wires on the canvas.
Yeah, and painting through it.
Huh. While we were talking, I Googled that, and it turns out we did a story in our newsletter, Realism Today, about his Graticola, and there's a photo of him painting. Amazing. Yeah,
I had done something in one of my posts about his Graticola, and I was going to do something else on it, so I've been piling up some new acquired articles on it because, like I said, the big thing that people miss is that whole angle thing. That's where the dynamics come from.
Well, and that's something I was going to ask you about related to this is that, a lot of people, let's say Kevin McPherson, for instance, Kevin will put a fairly complex grid system with a lot of angles. he'll grid it out corner to corner and then center to corner and so on, and create these fairly dynamic angles. And he's always looking to make sure that he has, I think he's always looking to make sure he has these really great angles in his painting. How important is that to you?
That's how I draw. But I don't map that stuff out. But I try not to most of the time draw things. I draw spaces and shapes and angles. So,
Yeah.
for example, if I'm painting a horse, let's say, because, they're kind of strange animals with those 4 long legs, I don't start out by worrying about whether or not they're legs. I'll look at the angles. So you can go from knee to knee, for example, or the shape of the negative space, or whatever it is that you're working with. So I don't draw a horse with 4 legs and a tail. I go for the angles. And then if you've got a rider on there, it's the same thing. You're looking at the angles. So, for example, wherever the rider's leg may be, you can make an angle from there to somewhere else. It could be the horse's hoof. There's lots of ways you can do that, but that's how I draw. So I don't draw the things.
But
draw the angles.
you're intentionally looking to make sure that you've got good angle work in your composition.
Yeah, and that'll then as you work that up, you can revise your drawing, obviously. Make some changes, but that immediately puts some kind of dynamics into your painting, because you aren't drawing things and filling them in. You're starting with the basics of visual information, so you've got line, shape, value, and color.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it makes drawing really easy, actually. And so it's somewhat like Mancini's Graticola, except, of course, without using a wire frame. But you can do the same thing when painting just about anything, Just hold your brush up and sight line it and see, is there an angle here? What's the angle,
Yeah.
And we're amazingly good at telling what an angle is. We can get a pretty good handle on that.
Well, that's something else that as I've started to kind of bring myself to a new level of sophistication, and I'm far, far from being sophisticated, but that's the one thing that I really have started noticing, is that if I can get some really good angles in my work, it really makes it brings it alive. And so I've been gridding some angles in, not necessarily following a specific pattern, but just the idea of, I need a big, sometimes I'll just take a brush stroke and I'll say, okay, how do I accomplish this kind of angle? How do I make this into, make my composition have this angle in it, just so that it has some interest?
Well, think about it. And the whole idea of using shapes to create things, and granted, rectangles can be kind of handy. Circles are our worst enemy because they go nowhere. So circles and arcs are not very interesting. Squares, obviously not very interesting because they're all the same. Rectangles, now a rectangle has some possibility because it can be kind of a variety of shape, right? So it offers possibility. But the shape with the most possibility is a triangle. And a triangle has, to me it has a sense of movement. It's unlike, a rectangle or a square, which are stable.
Yeah.
So the idea of teaching people to draw with those elements is kind of it's like using a horizontal vertical grid. It's just not very interesting. But if you can use angles and triangles to define your shapes and spaces, I think you're way ahead of the game. And then the other thing that it forces one to do is to interact with your canvas. So when you go in and let's say you're making an angle mark on your canvas, you're engaging with the space of your canvas, which is really critical. Instead of imposing some kind of outside structure onto the space of your canvas, you're becoming part of your canvas when you make that kind of mark.
Right.
Yeah. So it has it's a positive.
Interesting. So the big dilemma for so many people listening is trying to figure out the right way to learn. And,
Yeah.
there's guys like me out there who are peddling art instruction videos and things like that. There's people with books. There's people doing workshops. There's 1,000 different approaches. People people tend to get very discouraged very fast because there's this, how could I say this? In our society, we will tell ourselves that an artist is someone who has natural inborn talent. But we'll tell ourselves, of course, a musician has to learn their scales and has to learn to play a piano, and you can't just go up and pound on the keys. You got to know rhythm. You got to know, timing and so on. And if you're a surgeon, you have to go to school and learn how to cut, and you got to learn a lot of stuff before you get to that stage. So we have this belief. And people constantly say to me, well, I can't draw a stick figure. I don't have any talent. I can't do this. And that was me. I'm not an accomplished painter, but I'm happy at least the direction I'm going. But how do we get people to a point where they're actually engaged in learning and happy about it?
Well, I think the first thing is for people to realize that there is, first and foremost, there is no right or wrong here. Some things work better than other things. That's a given. But there's no right or wrong. So, it's one of those things that just, if it's somebody else's rules, you should consider it as somebody else's suggestions for the most part. Right. I say the only rules in this game are the ones that have to do with science. And there are a few of those having to do with light and color and things like that. Other than that, it's a little bit of a free-for-all. So if you accept first and foremost that there really are no rules. At the same time, there's no answer. See, that's a big thing. That's where people get discouraged because they think there's some kind of answer at the end of this rainbow. No, there's no answer.
What would that be?
Art is a reflection of life. And life is a journey. That's what makes art great. That's why we build museums to art, because it's a reflection of our lives on this planet.
Well, when you think about it, it truly is something that is part of our nervous system. We've got that brush in our hand that's coming through our eyes, through our brain, into our muscular system, into our movement of our hands, and we're responding to our nervous system. We're responding to what we see. There's nothing like it. I mean, music would be like it if you're ad-libbing your music.
Embodied cognition is kind of what you're talking about there, and that's basically just realizing that we aren't just a brain, we aren't just an eyeball. We're more than that. So everything comes into play. But Here's the other thing, is that a person is capable of doing interesting and, I would say, powerful imagery without a lot of extensive knowledge, as long as it's kind of like force of will thing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, for example, we're perhaps all slightly different at some things. I mean, I can draw okay, but I've never considered myself really, really good at drawing. I've seen some people that are amazing at drawing. But then other people will say, well, I can't draw that well. Well, that's fine, because here's the thing. If you have a weak skill set, for example, let's say it's drawing, you will probably end up compensating somewhere else. So something else might become your strong suit. Could be color, could be pattern. There are other visual elements that you can use to compensate for not very good drawing skills. And when you recognize that you have certain problems, then you can work on those problems. Here's the problem. Let's
okay,
say
but
I
have to challenge that for a second.
Okay,
I do hear
go ahead.
I do hear a lot of people who will say, if you can't draw, you can't paint. That drawing is the foundation. But if you're doing a painting of me, and you don't nail the likeness, everybody's going to know that it's not me if I'm publishing it. So isn't that essential that you have that drawing skill?
Well, drawing is handy. You can measure your way through something. I mean,
so you're drawing with a paintbrush, but you're still drawing. You're doing some form of architecture.
But I'm just saying you could measure your way through something. I'm not saying people definitely have to be able to draw some. That's a learnable skill. You know, drawing on the right side of the brain. For heaven's sakes, they've been doing workshops for years where they go in with people with no art experience whatsoever, put them into a 4 or 5 day workshop, and at the end of the week, their drawings are just fine. So, you know, they always do have you seen those images of before and after?
No.
Here's the people's images. They do self-portraits or else a portrait of someone sitting across from them at the beginning of the workshop, and then 4 or 5 days later, here's the improved version, and it's night and day. Because drawing is just learning to see.
Yeah.
So that's a doable thing. Reasonable drawing is a learernable skill.
Well, the thing that impacted me the
difference
most in
between-
drawing was learning to connect shapes. You know, learning,
drawing is learning to see things for what they actually are, and it's learning to translate that into a two-dimensional image. That's kind of what drawing is.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But that's what I've seen time and time again. There are people that can do, like I said, interesting paintings without having painted for years and years and years. So I'm not a buy-in on the whole skill set thing, because the other end of that spectrum, and I've seen this happen lots of times, where people are so skillful at certain things that they can't get out of that box.
I just had a conversation with an artist who told me of 3 painters that he knows that went to a very well-known atelier. And he said it was drilled into their heads. This is the way you have to do things all the time. You have to do this. No photographs, etc. And then it was so tightening. So what would be the word? They were imprisoned in this, and they couldn't get themselves beyond it. You know, they weren't willing to push themselves beyond it because that had been drilled into their heads so much you never go there, that they actually quit painting. That's a tragedy.
Oh yeah, definitely. See, here's a good lesson at least I learned a good lesson from it a long time ago. I used to judge the artwork at the fair, at our local fair. And so you have the kids categories and the adult categories. And I did that for I don't know how many years. And every year I'd kind of dread it, because I'd go in there and there'd be some kids' artwork in there that would just knock your socks off. It was just, I remember one little 7-year-old boy used to do, I don't know, he was into postage stamps. And so he'd do these remarks on envelopes that would be kind of, I don't know, it was phenomenal. But anyhow, I'd go in there and here'd be all this kids, and it was so lively and so interesting and sometimes so colorful, or it just had so much going for it. And then I'd go over to judge the adults' work, and all of it was stifled for the most part.
Yeah.
It just, because these people would get caught up in thinking that it was in the skill set. And then I guess they'd get too afraid of maybe making a mistake or something, where the kids didn't have that kind of fear. And so that was always a big lesson, because, boy, I could hand out blue ribbons, left and right for the kids' work. And then I'd get over to the adults, and I'd just have such a hard time trying to find something I could give a blue ribbon to, because the work just did not compare to the children's work at all.
Let me ask you about that, though. I studied photography under Fred Picker, who was a student of Ansel Adams. And I did a 2-week workshop with him, and we spent an awful lot of time not going outdoors and doing photographs. We were focusing on apertures and creating different effects with the camera. And I complained. I was 22 or 23 years old. And I said, I want to get out and shoot photographs. He said, you've got your whole life to do that. He said, you've got to learn enough technique that the technique becomes second nature so that then you then can get out there and implement anything. So in some regards, I kind of apply that to art and say, well, isn't there a certain technique that we have to learn, we have to apply? I mean, maybe have to is a little strong, but that if we want to be an accomplished painter, however you define that, maybe it's different if we want to be purely an abstract painter, but isn't...
No, abstract work is, you still need to learn to see. That's the thing. It's all about seeing.
But don't you also need to learn to do?
Well, you do, but see, that's where you get back to the idea of how to teach people. Somewhere there has to be that mixture of allowing people to make their own choices while also instructing them in ways that might make it easier for them to work. So, like I said before, there aren't any real rules here. People like to think there are rules, but boy, someone will come along and break that rule at some point. So there aren't real rules. There are some things that work better than other things, and there are some, let's say, tools that might make the job a little easier depending on how you paint. So one can teach people that information and give them some tools to be able to create with without, coming by and saying, oh, my word, that nose is just 1/8 of an inch off. Now, if it looks really weird, then fix it. But there's no right or wrong. There's no perfect here.
Yeah.
So there has to be a mix in teaching people information they can use while still maintaining their interest and keeping them excited about possibility.
You and I need a glass of wine, and we just need to continue this conversation for a long time because we could go on for hours. It's hard to believe we've blown through an hour already.
Oh, we have. Oh, my word.
and
we'll have to have part 2 and part 3.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to do that because there's so much more we need to do. But we're going to have to say goodbye for now, and then maybe we'll schedule a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4 and a part 5.
Sure. We'll come up with a lesson plan for how to keep people engaged while they're learning.
I like that. Well, Carolyn, this has been delightful. Thank you so much. I'm so stimulated every time I talk to you. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Well, this was a pleasure for me too, because I haven't had anyone to talk about art with for eons now. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, there is that. So
yeah.
we've all been a little sequestered, that's for sure. Well,
yeah.
Carolyn, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
Well, thanks again to Carolyn Anderson. She is brilliant. I could spend hours on the phone with this woman. She's just so intriguing and so knowledgeable and so studied. I'm very impressed. Anyway, you guys ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
Thank you, Jim. In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions. You can stump me if you want. You can email them to me, eric@artmarketing.com, which is a good website with lots of marketing stuff on it that we've put together. Anyway, artmarketing.com. Here's a question, and by the way, these are unscripted. I'm reading this for the first time. It's from Gabe Little in New Jersey, who says, when should artists start their holiday marketing, and are there other holidays that make sense to use for marketing? Well, every excuse that you have to get your name out there is a great excuse. And so whether it's 4th of July, I do this program called Art Marketing in a Box. It's a program designed to make people the superstar, well-known artist and sell a lot in their local communities. And it's got a lot of stuff based on every possible holiday. You can do birthday marketing if you know marketing birthdays of know the birthdays of people who bought your paintings. But, always the holidays, whether it's July 4th or whether it's Father's Day or Mother's Day, getting things out there way in advance. People are always looking for the ultimate gift, and they never know what to get, right? This is always a problem. And so you want to start it early. Now, I always have done a Christmas in July kind of thing. And the reason I do Christmas in July is because I say, if you want to commission a painting, get me working on it now so I can have it ready for Christmas. And so you could start that now. You still got time, but you want to be getting a head start on all marketing, all holiday marketing. I like to work 3-4 months in advance minimum. And in cases of commissions and things, you might need more time. So, all holidays make sense. I hope that helps. Gabe, here's a question from Jackie Bryant in Sacramento, California, who says, excuse me, my work is somewhat unusual. What's the best way to find the right market that would be interested in buying it? Well, the thing about art is it's pretty hard to categorize someone as the kind of person who would like abstract painting or the kind of person who would like realistic painting. My household would be a really great example of that. My wife likes things that are more colorful, more bright, more abstract, sometimes a little bit wild. And I tend to like things that are a little bit more subdued, a little bit more traditional in nature. And, the kids like all kinds of different stuff. And so every household is going to have a little bit of a mixture. And, there are people like me who I have very tight paintings. I have very loose paintings. I have a couple of abstract paintings. I do have a little bit of everything. So I don't think it's so much about finding the right market for your work. I think it's just the idea of getting yourself out there. You need to market yourself. Go after, if you think that, you want to market yourself to people who buy abstract paintings, then maybe advertise on the website or in a newsletter, email newsletter, or, a magazine or something, like Art News or something that's going to appeal more to people in that kind of a world. Whereas, my publications probably appeal to people more in the traditional realism kind of world. But that's a really great place. The point is you want to find concentrated audiences of people who are known art buyers, because if you just put yourself out there in the universe, that's nice, but you're going to pay a lot of money. You're going to have to reach a lot of people to find, one shiny penny in the crowd. And so you want to go for concentrated audiences where there are known people who love and buy art. And so that's probably the best answer I can give you, Jackie. I hope that helps. Anyway, this has been my opinion on how you can deal with marketing.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
Well, a couple of reminders. Realism Live, you want to save $200. You want to go to this. This is going to be absolutely incredible. There's a 100% money-back guarantee. And so if you don't like it by the end of the first day, you let us know. We're going to give you all your money back. And then you get the first day for free. Now, I know you're not going to abuse that, but it is so unbelievable. Check it out at realismlive.com. Also, get your PleinAir Salon entry in at pleinairsalon.com. And if you think you might want to come up and do fall color with us in the White Mountains, it's coming up on the 12th. It's for a week, painting every day, all day. We have a lot of fun. It's really incredible. So just come to fallcolorweek.com. If you've not seen my blog, where I talk about life and art and other things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee, and you can find it at coffeewitheric.com. This is always fun to do. I love doing it. We'll do it again sometime, like maybe next week, God willing. We'll see you then. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. You can find us online at outdoorpainter.com. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.